So this is going to be a talk through of one way of exploring and interpreting Ophelia's character, and I will show you some ways of drawing evidence from text for character and some ways of talking about that text in order to make sure that you are interpreting and inferencing. So hopefully you'll see from my talk through that Ophelia
So Ophelia appears to be one of the least developed characters in this play. She has lots of criticism waged against her for being static, for undergoing no development, for being really two-dimensional. Particularly when she gets compared to the complex nature of Hamlet, who has so many layers and conflicting attributes and detailed elements of characterization that they consume the action of the play, and Ophelia gets left way, way, way behind. I have this quote here that says, "I do not know, my lord, what I should think," indicating to us that Ophelia isn't sure of her own thoughts, that she waits for other people to instruct her what to do, that's the kind of character she is. And there are lots of critics who've agreed with this interpretation of Ophelia. We had Jamieson say, "What shall be said of her? For eloquence is mute before her," suggesting that she gives us nothing interesting that we can even say about her character. We have Hazlitt, who's a critic that you'll probably come across through your English studies, say that she is a character too exquisitely touching to be dwelt upon, a flower too soon faded, suggesting that she was purposefully made so naive and one-dimensional to increase the impact of killing her off so early in the play. There is more to be felt than to be said in the study of Ophelia's character, so again, we don't have very much to say about her. She is an emotional plot device. She is an element not of deep tragedy, but of pathetic beauty, which makes analysis of her character almost a desecration. That she is a character who serves a purpose to do with beauty. She is eye candy, she's emotional eye candy, she's there to make us feel something, and that it would be wrong to try and analyze her. But I'm going to go ahead and do so anyway. And then we finally just have Poor Wispy Ophelia by Mansfield. So despite people critiquing her character for being really, really two-dimensional and sort of uninteresting, she becomes the subject of whole bunches of pieces of art. And this is one example from 1851 that shows us Ophelia floating, we can assume dead, with hands in almost a prayer-like kind of meditative pose, still grasping a few of her flowers as the rest float off away. And she looks beautiful in this surrounding. So she really enchants people somehow, the tragedy of Ophelia. And the people who see this may be right. Ophelia, our critics that I talked about, may be right. Ophelia certainly is a secondary character. She doesn't drive a whole bunch of the plot of the play. She doesn't take up very many of the words. She appears in only 5 of the 20 scenes in the play physically, and she's mentioned in 2 others by Laertes and Polonius, but even so, that's 7 of 20 scenes that she figures in. She primarily serves as a plot device. She is Hamlet's cover for his feigned madness, as he intentionally pretends to be mad off stage in her dressing room, leading her running to her father in concern and getting Claudius to relax around him. So she's this plot device to help Hamlet achieve his goal of getting Claudius to believe he is mad. She is a point of contrast for the deceit and evil in the play. She epitomizes these good forces of naivety and innocence and purity, although she epitomizes them to her own demise. They could become flaws. And she balances Gertrude's negatively portrayed sort of sexual desire and corrupt nature. So we have these 2 women who give two pictures of femininity and female sexuality. We have one who is still characterized as naive, unable to really grasp what's going on around her and in disbelief when she does. And then we have one who is naive but well-meaning and in a different way. She has a lack of experience of the world. And she is our sort of pure innocent, as opposed to Gertrude, who is corrupted by her naivety. Most notably, though, she's a pathetic device. So when we say Ophelia is a pathetic plot device, we don't mean that she's a poorly executed plot device. What we're actually talking about is pathos. You may have come across pathos when you talk about pathos and logos and ethos in persuasive writing. Pathos is the emotional quality of things. Similarly, in a pathetic fallacy, where wind represents the emotion of the characters, or like a storm represents the emotion of the characters, or a sunset, or what have you, pathos is to do with emotion. So she's an emotional plot device. Given her two-dimensional, underdeveloped characterization, I want to explore the reasons why maybe audiences have this really strong emotional response to Ophelia. Why do they feel for her so very strongly? So one way you can do character analysis is to look at how they develop over time. So look at how they are introduced, look at whether people's perceptions of them in the play align with how they are presented to the audience and their actions, or look at how they are different later to they were in the beginning. So let's look at Ophelia in the beginning. Ophelia in the beginning is introduced to us with this exchange that we talked about between Laertes and then between her and her dad Polonius. Her mother's absent. We don't have a mother for Ophelia. Though both Laertes and Polonius do appear to genuinely love her, they continually belittle her, highlighting her naivety through their long speeches. And these long speeches then contrast with her quick, timid, and obedient responses. So Shakespeare's making very clear to us Ophelia's social kind of limitations as a young woman who is unmarried in court. So we have this speech. Think it no more, for nature crescent does not grow alone in thews and bulk, but as this temple waxes, the inward service of the mind and soul grows wide withal. Perhaps he loves you now, and now no soil nor cautel doth besmirch the virtue of his will, but you must fear. His greatness weighed, his will is not his own. It's a really significant couple of lines there about Hamlet's control over his own will and destiny. For he himself is subject to his birth. He may not, as unvalued persons do, carve for himself, for on his choice depends the safety and the health of this whole state, and therefore must his choice be circumscribed unto the voice and yielding of that body whereof he is the head. Then if he says he loves you, it fits his wisdom so far to believe it as he in this particular act and place may give his saying deed, which is no further than the main voice of Denmark goes withal. Then weigh what loss your honour must sustain, if with too credent ear you list his songs, or lose your heart, or your chaste treasure open to his unmastered opportunity. Fear it, Ophelia, fear it, my dear sister, and keep you in the rear of your affection, out of the shot and danger of desire. The chariest maid is prodigal enough if she unmask her beauty to the moon. Virtue itself scopes not calumnious strokes. The canker galls the infant of the spring too oft before their buttons be disclosed, and in the morn and liquid dew of youth contagious blasphements are most imminent. Be wary then. Best safety lies in fear. Youth to itself rebels, though none else near. So we get this really long speech that begins with a contrasting of what people feel and what they are able to do. And Laertes suggests that it may be true, Hamlet may feel that he loves you, and he may tell you this genuinely, But Hamlet is not in control of his own will and destiny. Hamlet has too much responsibility to be able to choose who he loves. Choosing who you love is something that only lower people can do. And since you're not a princess, Prince Hamlet will not be able to make good on his promises to you. And since we know he can't do that, think carefully about the consequences if you are to let him seduce you, if you are to believe and open your heart to him, your heart will be broken. And if you open your treasure chest, which we can imagine what that metaphor stands for, if you give him your virginity, if you open yourself sexually to him, then you could well be left in spring with a baby all alone to raise. You'll be ruined. It will ruin you. Her response to this, and it's one of the longer pieces of speech that she does, she says, "I shall the effect of this good lesson keep as watchman to my heart. But good, my brother, do not as some ungracious pastors do, show me the steep and thorny way to heaven, whiles, like a puffed and reckless libertine, himself the primrose path of dalliance treads and recks not his own reed." So she says, I'll listen and I'll heed this advice, but don't go back to France and not be taking your own advice over there. And it's up to you whether you interpret this as cheeky, but I think there's an element of wit about this little response here. And she's calling to attention, again, this idea of what people say and what people do by referring to pastors who preach one thing and live another thing. So in this scene, Ophelia is characterized as childish. She requires the explanation of men's wicked ways through all of those different sorts of metaphors. And she needs the advice and sheltering of her brother and father, which she accepts fairly obediently. The audience in this scene views Ophelia as pure and transparent in her motives and her nature. We don't really doubt or suspect anything from Ophelia. She provides a point of relief from the complex, brooding, shifting character of Hamlet, who is this intellectual and increasingly duplicitous man who makes not only the people around him in the play question him and his motives, but make the audience do so as well. So she almost serves not as comic relief, but as this sort of light-hearted, happy relief from the character of Hamlet and his complexity. She fills the romance element that Elizabethan audience would have wanted to see, and I think contemporary audiences respond equally well to having a romance plot within a text. It is very hard to find a text that doesn't have some kind of romance element, even if it's like the D plot and there's an ABC plot before it. There's usually a romance love interest element. She also foreshadows to the audience that this nature that she's been characterized as having makes her really easily used, not just used as a plot device by Shakespeare, but used by the characters around her who we know are all scheming and plotting and manipulating situations, and that she, as naive as she is, won't be able to pick up on this. Not only that, but she won't have any power to manipulate those around her because of her gender and her social standing. So Polonius warns her off Hamlet because he fears their matching would earn him disfavor with Claudius, while Laertes warns her off Hamlet because he's worried about the consequences for her emotionally and also in the way that people perceive her should she become unchaste because of Hamlet's actions. So they have different motives for why they warn her off Hamlet, but they both do the same thing. These are just some images here of Ophelia from different sources. I guess it's just interesting to see the one on the left there is making direct eye contact with the camera, so it's much more seductive and purposeful than the other two whose gaze are averted. So talking about Ophelia being a pawn and the foreshadowing that happens, this comes true when Polonius decides to use Ophelia to get Hamlet to admit his troubles to her and to allow him to spy on Hamlet through her. Hamlet, either aware of this ploy or because he wants to distance Ophelia from him because he doesn't want to hurt her, makes an effort to insult her and show her his complete disillusionment with the whole gender of women, and transfers his anger for his mother onto Ophelia. And we have this speech happen. Get thee to a nunnery. Why wouldst thou be a breeder of sinners? I am myself indifferent, honest, but yet I could accuse me of such things that it were better my mother had not borne me. I am very proud, revengeful, ambitious, with more offences at my beck than I have thoughts to put them in, imagination to give them shape, or time to act them in. What should such fellows as I do, crawling between earth and heaven? We are arrant knaves all, believe none of us. Go thy ways to a nunnery. Where's your father? At home, my lord. If thou dost marry, I'll give thee this plague for thy dowry. Be thou as chaste as ice, as pure as snow, thou shalt not escape calumny. Get thee to a nunnery. Go, farewell. Or if thou wilt needs marry, marry a fool. For wise men know well enough what monsters you make of them. To a nunnery, go, and quickly too, farewell. And then Ophelia sort of cries, oh, heavenly powers, restore him. But she doesn't cry that to Hamlet. She cries that to sort of the ether. I have heard of your paintings too, well enough. God hath given you one face, and you make yourselves another. You jig, you amble, and you lisp. You nickname God's creatures, and make your wantonness your ignorance. Go to. I'll no more on it. It hath made me mad. I say, we will have no more marriages. Those that are married already, all but one shall live. The rest shall keep as they are. To a nunnery, go. So obviously this is a really important scene about the relationship between Hamlet and Ophelia, and also about Hamlet's plan to convince everyone that he's mad. And you'll have immediately noticed the number of times he says, get thee to a nunnery to her. So a little bit of technical analysis when he is using that imperative voice, which is the strong voice where you instruct someone to do them. So declarative is when you make a statement, interrogative is when you ask a question, and imperative is when you tell. When you use the imperative, it's showing who has the control and the power in that situation. And even though Hamlet's pretending to be mad, he's still intellectually above her, he's still above her in class, he's still above her because of his gender, and he still really controls this entire situation. And that's shown to us through the imperative that he continues to use, get thee to a nunnery. Nunnery refers to a convent, but the word convent back then also used to refer to brothels, which gives us a double entendre, a double meaning, which Shakespeare's really, really good at. And what this double meaning does is contrast the purity of Ophelia with the sin that he is accusing her of and attaching to her. Hamlet says that he himself wouldn't bother to call himself honest, but he tests Ophelia by asking if she is honest, then asking when her father is. This is a trick. The implication is that he already knows Polonius is hidden watching this go on, and he knows he's been baited into this situation, that he's being spied on. And so he tests her by asking where her father is, and when she says he's at home, Hamlet knows she's lying, and it's possible that in this moment he becomes genuinely upset or offended by her actions. So Ophelia shows that her loyalty is to her father, that she is willing to lie for her father to Hamlet, and that she is actually pretending. He refers again to the nunnery, but now more threateningly. This time there's an implication that she may need to, 1, repent for all of these sins that he has listed, or 2, that she's actually going to need protection from Hamlet or from other men who are out there and will corrupt her or corrupt her reputation, even if they don't physically do it. That can do as much damage. So it becomes really menacing and threatening, and he says, a convent is where you'll be safe. You need protecting from the world. He says, I'll give thee a plague for thy dowry, and Hamlet threatens Ophelia with rumours or calumny that will follow her, no matter how pure she is in reality, that he can make another reality through Chinese whispers, through lies, through rumours, that he can give weight, that Horatio could give weight, that would ruin her. And then he compares her to both ice and snow, which is an interesting use of imagery. And while these are white, indicating purity and virginity, snow and ice are also things that both mask potential danger or threat. So it is very challenging or like difficult to walk on ice and snow, and when you do, you're always preparing yourself to trip or fall, or you wouldn't walk on a frozen lake because you don't know at what point that ice is going to crack thin and reveal the water to drown you in. So the ice and snow imagery has connotations both of beauty but also of a hidden danger, and by using imagery that has both of those contrasting connotations, we're highlighting again that being pure, being chaste, being naive and girly and virginal doesn't necessarily mean that she is not a threat, and that he sees that. It's at this point in the play that we get to see inside Ophelia's own mind. So after Hamlet finishes his rant and verbal abuse of Ophelia, maybe that's too strong a word. It depends if you infer this scene as him protecting her by being so awful that she will distance herself from him, or if you interpret it as him genuinely mad at her once she lies. Anyway, however you interpret that, we get to see her respond. And this is her soliloquy. It's from inside her mind. It's her talking to herself. And she says, "Oh, what a noble mind is here overthrown. The courtiers, scholars, soldiers, eye, tongue, sword, the expectancy and rose of the fair state, the glass of fashion and the mould of form, the observed of all observers, quite down. And I, of ladies most deject and wretched, that sucked the honey of his music vows, now see that noble and most sovereign reason, like sweet bells jangled, out of tune and harsh, that unmatched form and feature of blown youth blasted with ecstasy. Oh, woe is me to have seen what I have seen, see what I see." So here we have Ophelia upset by having the Hamlet that she once knew reveal what she believes to be his inner madness and anger and inability to control his emotions. And she is trying to reconcile his outward appearance of being fashionable, of being smart, intellectual, being really, really capable, with this revealing of what she believes to be his inner self. And it disturbs her so much that she believes she may have caused this madness by rebuking him and distancing herself from him initially. She thinks it's her fault, and she feels terrible guilt about this and terribly confused about what she's just witnessed. So is there more to Ophelia than being a pathetic plot device? Well, she offers very little in terms of complexity of personality, yet people react with really strong emotions to her role within the text. So strong, in fact, that there are records of people rushing onto stages to try and save her when they know that she's going to probably drown herself, but definitely die, because they feel so much for her that productions used to get interrupted by this. So it's possible that over time, audiences have developed this way of reading into Ophelia's character a significance that isn't really evident in the original text alone, but that comes from kind of social context. It comes from what people read into it based on their own kind of experiences and beliefs. I think that maybe it's her absence from the play that makes her so interesting. Maybe it's the fact that she's not there that makes us feel so strongly for her when she does appear truly mad, and eventually her life ends, that the little glimpses we've given of her have been sort of so well written that we want much more of her, and when that's taken away from us, we react really strongly. So while that soliloquy that she had is really concerned with Hamlet, and that's the only view inside her mind, and her mind is thinking of Hamlet. It's really sad that she never features in Hamlet's thoughts or private musings, or in his conversations with his best friend Horatio. And I think that is a big tell about their relationship. Her mind is consumed with him. She is last on his list of things to worry about. He's got 99 problems. Ophelia ain't one. So the play becomes really caught up in making sense of Hamlet's own state of mind, that this contrast of Ophelia's very kind of visceral, real madness and even melancholy is deeply affecting, because we now have a comparison between someone who is intending to present themselves as mad, and we're not sure if he's really intelligent and pulling it off really well, the faking of the madness, and we can't make sense of that, with someone who's genuinely suffering. And I think that makes her suffering all the more real. So Bradley says of Ophelia, "In her wanderings, we hear from time to time an undertone of the deepest sorrow, but never the agonized cry of fear or horror which makes madness dreadful or shocking. And the picture of her death, if our eyes grow dim in watching it, is still purely beautiful." So that's how Bradley felt. What do you feel for Ophelia as you watch and read this text? Of extra discussion in criticism is actually the symbolism to do with the flowers. So when Ophelia comes to court, clearly mad, handing out flowers, people have debated whether she chose particular flowers suitable for particular characters that had some kind of meaning, or whether she was just handing out whatever happened to be in her hand. But there came this sort of long-established tradition in the performances of these plays where she always reserved rosemary to give to Hamlet. She gives pansies to Laertes, fennels and columbines to Claudius, and rue to the queen and to herself, linking herself with the queen. And a critic called Hunter says this: "Ophelia, in unbalanced mind, thinks of marriage. When it comes to the idea of rosemary, and she addresses him who should have been the bridegroom, Hamlet himself, as her lover, so the rosemary signifying marriage. She then, having thought about marriage, feels her disappointment. Hamlet is not there, and she turns to another flower, the pansy or heart's ease, as more fitting for her condition. The pansy is associated with melancholy. When the mind is unsettled, it is usual for some idea to recur which has been introduced at a critical period of one's life. So when Laertes was warning Ophelia against encouraging the attentions of Hamlet, he urged her to consider them as trifling, and his love but as a violet in the youth of primary nature." So Hunter suggests these words, imprinted on her mind in association with the idea of Hamlet and her brother, are now recalled when she again converses with her brother on the same unhappy subject. Violets represent faithfulness, and they all withered when her lover, by the slaying of her father, had interposed a final obstacle to her union with them. So she uses the withered violets that she wished to give as a symbol of the final straw on the camel's back, preventing Hamlet and Ophelia from ever being together, because Hamlet killed her father, so fair enough. So we have rosemary suggesting remembrance, that's worn at both weddings and funerals. We have pansy, which is a symbol of thought, pensiveness, of grief. We have daisies, to do with faithlessness and dissembling. Fennel, to do with flattery, and columbine, ingratitude. And these two flowers, Ophelia fittingly presents to the faithless and manipulative Claudius. Rue is this bitter plant that has medical qualities, and in folklore it was a symbol of repentance. She calls it an herb of grace on Sundays, because the wearer, when entering church on that day, dipped his rue in holy water and blessed himself with it in the hope of attaining God's grace or mercy. So she says, "There's rue for you," to the queen, "and here's some for me," and she links them through that action. The queen, however, is to wear hers with a difference, that is, in token of repentance, while Ophelia will wear it in regret and grief at the loss of her father and her lover. In this distribution of flowers, the demented maiden is seen naively but unwittingly to choose the flower that is most suited to each person. So it's suggested that it's kind of accidental that she gives the flowers that hold these meanings to the correct, appropriate people. And here's another depiction of Ophelia in the river, drowning herself or having accidentally fallen in or having been pushed in by Gertrude, who knows? But here she is in her death scene again, which is made to look beautiful. So my interpretation is this. Ophelia is most certainly a static character. Her key role is to advance plot and to act as a foil to other characters, highlighting aspects of their personality by contrasting her own. However, over time, increasing emphasis has been placed on her role in garnering emotional reactions from those watching a production of Hamlet. Whilst two-dimensional, modern viewers are able to interpret Ophelia's illness and demise as of equal tragedy to that of Hamlet, as we react strongly to the notion of a woman driven to extreme melancholy purely through absence of thought for her by those around her. And here's a quote from another critic. The poet is accused of having shown little in regard to poetical justice. The gratification of the destruction of the usurper, the murderer, is abated by the untimely death of Ophelia, the young, the beautiful, the harmless, the pious. So I think the fact that one of the least developed, most criticised characters from this text still has so much to offer audiences and still elicits such a strong emotional response signifies that this is a text of great textual integrity with enduring relevance.